welcome to another edition of Dog Pod, our world famous podcast, of course. And this is our first one for 2021. And we've got a very special guest with us today, all the way from Atlanta, Carol Novello. She's the founder of Mutual Rescue, author of the book, which you can see in the background, Mutual Rescue. It actually looks like a really big book, Carol.
It is. Yeah. It's a large print edition.
The book is about how adopting a homeless animal can save you too. Come out in paperback April 2020 last year. Fantastic achievement. Mutual Rescue is a national initiative that highlights the connection between people and their pets in order to inspire and support life-saving efforts in communities across the nation and the world. And I love this. Mutual Rescue's first short film, and I've watched it. It's a bit of a tearjerker. Eric and Petey went viral around the globe and has been viewed more than 100 million times. Congratulations and welcome to Dog Pod.
Thanks, Scott. It's really fun to be here.
So I wanted to talk a bit today about rescue animals, particularly for us being in the dog business. We like to talk about dogs, obviously, a lot more. Love cats too, but I'm a bit allergic to them, so that doesn't always go down so well. But look, tell us a little bit about your background first. How did you get started with Mutual Rescue? Because you're the founder of it as well as head honcho and running the show. So how did it all come about?
Well, it was very serendipitous. So I actually had a career in high tech. I was a senior executive in Silicon Valley for many years. And I had no inclination that I was going to go into nonprofit work or animal welfare, but through a series of serendipitous steps, so to speak, I had the opportunity to join the board at Humane Society Silicon Valley. And I decided to do that because I love animals, and animals have always been a big part of my life. You can see my cat walking around in the background there.
Right on cue. Perfect.
Right on cue. And one thing led to another, and they asked me if I wanted to become president of the organization. And I had not anticipated. I have an MBA from Harvard, and I was a senior executive at Intuit, and it had never dawned on me that I might do something like this. But it was a great organization doing amazing work. And I said yes. So I dove in. And I was president of Humane Society of Silicon Valley for almost a decade. And we became the first shelter in the United States to meet all of the guidelines put forth by the Association of Shelter Veterinarians. So pretty big accomplishment in the animal welfare world.
That's fantastic.
And while I was serving as president there, one of the things that people would sometimes say to me is, why are you helping animals when you could be helping people? And I thought that was pretty curious, because I knew in my own life how much animals had impacted me and do impact me. And I was seeing it every day in the animals that were getting adopted at Humane Society of Silicon Valley. And so that is what led to the creation of Mutual Rescue. A little more detailed than that, but it came about from that question and really wanting to change the conversation from people or animals to people and animals.
Yeah. And I love your focus on rescue animals. I think sometimes, and something I wanted to talk about with you today on the call, is sometimes there's a perception or an association with rescue animals that they've been put in a rescue thing because they're either too aggressive or but the fact is there's so many reasons why dogs and cats and various animals end up in shelters. Could you touch on some of them for us? Because I'd love to sort of demystify some of this. I think so many people these days are spending, and I'm going to call it unnecessary money, on designer breeds, and it's beautiful because there's some gorgeous dogs out there. I mean, I think now the way the world's evolved, there's more than 440 different breeds of dogs. And it's growing, especially with the poodle breeds and all the kind of strange mixes that are coming out. But what are some of the reasons these dogs end up in shelters? Can you help demystify the rescue dogs and cats for us?
Sure. I mean, the first thing is that there are just some amazing animals that come through the shelter. I would say, we took in almost 7,000 animals a year at Humane Society of Silicon Valley. And, the exception was the really aggressive dog or cat. there's a whole variety of reasons. It can be anything from, people get married and their new spouse is allergic to an animal. They have a baby and they don't feel like they have enough time. They're moving and they're going overseas and they can't take the dog with them. Their job changes and they're not able to spend as much time with the animal and they feel that that would be the best thing. People come into economic hardship and are unable to provide the care that's necessary. I mean, the list goes on and on. And
Yeah.
so, to just do a broad brushstroke and say, oh, there aren't any good animals out, in the shelter, and that's just not true.
Right.
And in fact, I would say that, I've seen with so many animals, I feel like they know they're getting a second chance, and there's just this appreciation with so many of them that I think is incredibly heartwarming and
Yeah.
and really enriches the relationship between the animal and the human.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I love that. And I mean, we've done some work here in Australia with Katie Brock, who's an animal behaviorist that's worked on a lot of movies and films. And she always says the best dogs for working in film and TV and rescue dogs. They're great working animals. They've got terrific energy. They're very smart. They've almost like they've got this life experience behind them that really helps their personalities kind of sort of shine.
Yeah.
I think that, it's kind of crazy, isn't it? Hey,
I had two shepherds that I adopted from Humane Society of Silicon Valley, and they were both amazing dogs. I mean, just fabulous. So that's the other thing is people are like, even if you're attached to a specific breed, a lot of times, for whatever reasons, those breeds are ending up in shelters and rescues too. So, I always think it's worth checking out those options. And the one thing I want to say about designer dogs, there's a not very pretty underbelly to that in terms of puppy mills and a lot of things that are going on there. And so if you can support the shelter and rescue ecosystem, you're doing a lot of good in the world, not just for the animal, but for other animals as well.
yeah, it's a double whammy, isn't it? It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
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 Hey, I wanted to ask, some of the stories that you've captured are just unbelievable. But before we get into some of the heartwarming and the inspiration, can you touch on the figures for me? Because I was quite frank, I mean, we're based in Australia, so we see here in Australia, our dog population in terms of domestic dogs is, in homes and stuff is about 5.5 million. In the US, it's 10 times that with like 55 million dogs. Can you please share the number of dogs in shelters? And I read the euthanasia statistic, and I was quite frankly really shocked and pained by it. I couldn't believe the numbers were so big. Do you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, I mean, there's about 6.5 million animals that are coming into shelters in the U.S. every year, and about 1.5 million of those are still getting euthanized. And the good news is that number has come way down. It used to
Right.
be much, much larger. So the good news is things are absolutely moving in the right direction. But really, there's no reason for an animal to be euthanized unless it's in their best interest in the context of it's the most humane thing to do because of a medical condition that isn't treatable.
Sure.
Or a situation where you have an animal that is so aggressive, it is a danger to another animal or to people. Those are really the only reasons for euthanasia. And we can get there, but those are big numbers. And when you
They're
start looking
huge
at,
numbers.
yeah, I mean,
Huge.
so, the population of San Francisco is about 750,000. So that's euthanizing the equivalent of twice the population of San Francisco every year. And that's just not okay.
No, that's insane. And the dogs that, let's say, I'll bluntly, do require, I guess, euthanasia for the aggressive reasons or the terminally ill sort of medical conditions, that would be an extremely small percentage, I would imagine.
It would. So at Humane Society Silicon Valley, when I handed over the reins to the new president, our save rate was 96% overall for all animals, but our save rate for dogs was between 98 and 99%.
Wow.
And so that just shows you in the context of that, there's between 1% and 2% of the population that we would euthanize for the reasons that I mentioned.
Yeah.
And so, there's absolutely no question we can do much better. I mean, one of the things that's interesting that's going on in the United States is that you actually have southern parts of the country are still dealing with tremendous overpopulation, but northern parts of the United States actually, they've got empty spaces in their shelter. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done to how do you get the animals, out of the south and up into the north, but you have to deal with issues like disease prevention and protocol. You can't just, ship a bunch of dogs if they're heartworm positive from Louisiana up to Massachusetts. So, there's still a lot to be done, but I definitely think we're moving things in the right direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sounds like it. Tell us a little bit about your programs and some of the things that Mutual Rescue does, because you've got some fantastic programs. I've got a list of stuff here in front of me, but walk us through some of the local community stuff, what you're doing locally, what you're doing on a national level, some of the training involved for people. And
yeah. So there's basically three parts to Mutual Rescue. We're really creating a new national, if not international, animal welfare brand. And there are three pillars to it, so to speak. The first is authentic storytelling. And that's really where we started. And that's to capture the hearts of people and really help them understand at a visceral level how animals are impacting humans, and that the rescue isn't just one way. It really is truly a mutual rescue. The second thing is engagement, and that is by looking at programs that are on the leading edge of the interaction of humans and animals. And we collaborate with other shelters and rescues across the country to come up with best practices. We launched a Doggy Day Out toolkit in conjunction with working with a number of shelters across the country. And that program is essentially, it's a field day for the animal. So you can go to the shelter and take a dog out for the afternoon. So it's a low barrier to participation way that you can engage with the shelter. And then what happens is those dogs are getting more exposure and they get adopted faster. So one of the first shelters in the country to implement that program was Fredericksburg SPCA, and they had a 20% increase in adoptions, and they were able to get animals adopted much more quickly because of that program.
Yeah, love it.
So if you're interested in a Doggy Day Out program in your community or in your shelter, we have that toolkit. If you go to mutualrescue.org and click on the Doggy Day Out tab, you can download that toolkit. It'll help you get up and running much more quickly. We also have a private Facebook group where you can ask questions and get help and support in order to work through whatever you need to get it going at your shelter or in your community. And then we also have a directory that if you're interested in doing a Doggy Day Out, that you can find a shelter in your area where you can go and do that program. So we also have a new program we're working on right now regarding pet pantries. So it can help keep animals and humans together when their families come into a situation where they have to make a choice between feeding their kids or feeding their animals. We're just developing that now and hope to have that rolled out probably in limited form sometime this summer and then start scaling in the fall. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah, that's a great initiative. So that kind of addresses the hardship issue, doesn't it? That you can then, yeah, love it.
Well, especially right now with the pandemic, people are losing their jobs, they're losing places to live, and you're just thinking about the human aspect of that, but in fact, those families often include animals, and the animals get impacted, and so we view this as kind of really timely to get this up and running. And again, collaborating with organizations that already have these programs to get best practices so that we can help communities that don't have these programs get them in place, as well as bringing new tools and processes to bear that help existing programs to become more effective and more efficient.
Yeah, that's terrific.
So
sorry,
again,
sorry, back to your pillars. Yeah, I interrupted you.
Yeah, back to pillars. So again, first pillar, authentic storytelling.
Yep.
Second pillar, engagement, which is again kind of national messaging that then gets enacted at the local level. And then the third pillar is corporate sponsorship. So that's bringing more money into the sector and getting it to the local level. So a lot of times people give to a national organization and they think that that's going to help their local shelter when in fact there's really no connection. And so what we want to do is create this, again, national message, which corporations need if they're going to participate, because they need a broader geographic footprint than just one regional area. But then we want to use that opportunity to take that money and distribute it out to the shelters and rescues that we're have in our network and that we're working with. So we just had a great corporate gift from Dutch Bros, which is a coffee chain on the West Coast. They generously donated $100,000 to Mutual Rescue, and we were able to do 10 $10,000 grants to shelters that were in their geographic footprint. So we're
Brilliant.
looking to do a lot more of that. And as we get some of these other programs up and running, and we're basically aggregating all of these local shelters together, that will make it possible for us to drive funds to them as well. Because we don't want to compete. We want to bring incremental funds into the sector.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, it sounds so well thought out, the way you manage this. So kudos to you guys for the way you've implemented a lot of this. I think your programs and that are brilliantly thought out. I love the way you involve the communities too at a local level. And I wanted to just, before we get into some of the stories, the impact of COVID. We obviously watch international markets with dogs, and we've seen an explosion, and maybe this is what you're referring to before with North America, an explosion of pet adoption throughout the US, where, during COVID, people working from home, they're lonely. How accurate is that? What's the impact you've seen?
Accurate. It's
Right,
actually
there you
not
go.
accurate.
Those
Yeah,
journalist spin.
well, what's interesting is intake into shelters overall has gone down. And
Right.
so, well, a lot of people, so what you're hearing is, our shelters are empty. Isn't that awesome? And
Yeah,
it
that's what
is
we're
awesome.
hearing. Yeah.
Yeah, so that is awesome. But one of the reasons is because intake is down so dramatically. So I think the estimate I read recently was intake is down anywhere between 25 and 30%.
Wow.
And so, well, that makes it much easier to get the animals that are in the shelters out and adopted. There has been an increase in fostering. And so people are definitely fostering more.
Right.
And, so part of it is, people are home. And so they're able to care for their animals more. And there's just, what we don't know is kind of, are there more animals roaming about? I mean, people are home more, and I think that's part of the reason. But what I'm worried about is what happens when we finally get on the other side of the pandemic.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about that, because post-COVID, there has to be a whole bunch of concerns.
Yeah, I mean, are we going to see, are things going to kick back up? I mean, I think we are going to see intake increase again, because people are going to become more active, and they're going to have more scenarios where they're not able to keep their animals. So we'll see what happens. But I certainly think a lot of people have decided to adopt during this time. And again, that combined with the reduced intake makes it look, woo, the shelters are empty. And that is great. Don't get me wrong.
It's a good start.
The underlying dating, the data's.
So what is it we need to see change, I guess, in human beings to be able to, it's never probably going to be a non-issue. There's always going to be rescue shelters. There'll always be part of that. But what has to, in your experience, you've been doing this for a long time, what is it that has to change in human beings to understand the benefit that an animal can bring to your life?
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting is that they're really, and this is what mutual rescue is about, which is we have to think about animals in the context of also how we think about people. And if you look at why animals are coming into shelters, there's a wide degree of reasons. And people from all economic walks of life are surrendering animals to a shelter. So there's definitely just, I think, education in terms of helping people understand that it is a commitment to bring an animal into your home. But there's also some issues that are tied that where you find human poverty, you also find situations where the animals end up homeless. So in Silicon Valley, we found that 30% of the dogs that were coming into Silicon Valley shelters were coming from 5 zip codes in East San Jose. So when we started looking at this, there were 11,000 dogs that were coming into the 6 shelters in San Jose, in the Silicon Valley area. And so what we focused on was, how do we make sure that those dogs are getting spayed and neutered? Because basically people didn't have access to low cost or convenient spay neutering. So we raised the money, we started doing free spay and neuters in those 5 zip codes. And we were able to reduce the intake of dogs from those 5 zip codes, or not from the whole population, but it reduced it by 4,000. So we dropped intake down to 7,000.
Wow.
So it's really important that we look at that. So, whenever you have issues of, are people getting access to medical care, and, can they afford those kinds of things? And, a lot of folks take incredibly good care of their animals. I mean, one of the stories that I talk about in the book is a homeless man who lost his dog, and he walked, I think it was like 2 or 3 miles back and forth every day to the shelter to try and find his dog. And homeless people that are feeding their dogs before they feed themselves. And so, because sometimes I'll hear the argument, and, a friend of mine even said to me, I was biased against homeless people having animals, and then I read your book and it gave me an entirely different perspective. So I always want to be cautious around that, so people don't end up saying, oh, well, you're not allowed to have animals if you don't make a certain amount of money. And it's like, in many cases, those animals, it's about, is that animal loved? I mean, I've seen, really wealthy people who are like, oh, we don't have time for this animal, and they dump it at the shelter, and they have all the money in the world. So you can't make that the criteria. At the same time, you've really got to look at, what's driving the situation where animals are becoming homeless, and we have to look at that interaction on the human side.
Yeah, I love that, because if you can address the issues, you can keep the love in people's life.
Exactly.
It's really as simple as that, isn't it? It's just trying to get to the bottom of it. I love the stories. I watched 3 of the videos yesterday morning. I got to tell you, like, tears welled up on all 3. They are phenomenal stories. You've done an incredible job pulling them together. Obviously, Eric and Petey is probably the big signature one. Tremendous story, and what a great guy. I just love the story. I also watched the interview when he was interviewed on Today Show, I think it was, as well. And yeah, just a beautiful dog. What an incredible bond. And it's quite extraordinary just how much his life has changed because of a dog coming into his life. It was extraordinary. Not just the weight he lost, his whole attitude to life was just incredible.
Well, it's interesting. Eric will say that he really, for the first time, truly experienced unconditional love, and that opened up his heart, that it also made him a nicer person. So exercising and walking PD helped him lose weight, but it was the emotional transformation that I think was just as profound.
Yeah.
And for me, that is one of the things about having an animal that I think is so important, which is the feeling of being loved and having that opportunity to give and receive love. And the ideal situation is that you get that from humans and you're able to share that with animals. But for some people, their first time of that experience is actually through an animal. And that is like, that's why we're here. Like, it's all about love.
And it's kind of sad and beautiful all at the same time that some people have never felt that until they've had an animal. And if that's what it takes to sort of open the door, brilliant. I mean, it's incredible. I love the Mike and Abby story too. I also watched the Josh and Scout one, and Scout's a cat. And we're very dog focused, but that was a beautiful story as well. Mike and Abby, what an incredible dog, and so sad. I can't believe this, and I'm sure you've got lots of stories like this. We see it as well, but here's this dog left on a bridge with cars and trucks whizzing by it, and what a great human being that stopped the car, stopped traffic to get out and spend an hour chasing down this dog to get it safely to a shelter. An incredible human being. But what a beautiful dog. And what it's gone on to do with all the surfing, and it's like won
Yeah.
Guinness Book of Records now for like the longest wave, and it's won more surfing contests.
Longest wave surfed by a dog is held by Abby. Yeah, yeah, and I think one of the reasons I love that story so much is because, as you mentioned, Abby was abandoned on a busy highway, so she was very traumatized from that
Yeah.
experience, and
Oh,
she was really shut down when she came into the shelter from that experience. And the whole first year that that Mike had her, like they really had to work together. She was scared of squirrels and
yeah.
shadows and like all these things, but he helped build up her confidence. And then just through serendipity, she would follow him everywhere. And he was out swimming in the ocean one day, and she's like paddling after him and stuff. And he just says to a surfer, like, "Hey, could my dog rest on your surfboard for a minute?" And then this wave came in, and rather than like getting freaked out and jumping off, she like stood up and she's like, "Hey, I am ready to go." So he like Mike pushes her like into the wave, and she goes all the way to shore, and she's like, that was like, she hops off, she's all ready to go
Yeah,
again, and
let's go again. Yeah.
let's go again. And then Mike starts entering in these surfing contests, and ends up becoming this dog surfing champion. But what I love about that is just her resilience, and how she blossomed over time. I mean, she got more than a second chance. She got this like explosion into a vibrant, gorgeous life.
Yeah.
And I just find that inspiring. I mean, you
Yeah.
just sit there and like look at the trauma that this dog went through and the resilience and how she blossomed afterwards. That
Yeah.
tells us it's possible. And if it's possible for a dog that went through that, it's possible for us as humans. And that's what I
Yeah.
find inspiring.
One of the things I find so extraordinary, and I think this is probably a really good takeaway, I think, for people who are, as a family, maybe considering a dog, and they're weighing up, do I go to a rescue shelter? Do I buy a dog? Or, all that sort of stuff. I find it so incredible the moment someone like Mike connects eyes with an Abby
Yeah,
who's cowered down in the corner while all the other dogs are barking, trying to get attention. Just
yeah,
that little moment when people first connect, I think is such an incredible moment. And for people to experience that with rescue dogs, there's something about it, isn't there? I don't know how to put it into words, and maybe I'm just,
yeah,
you know, making the airy fairy stuff up, but there just seems to be the dog finds the right human, the human finds the
yeah,
right dog.
yeah.
And that
It
really
is
comes
amazing.
across in your stories.
Yeah. Well, and that's it. I think, it's not unlike falling in love. I mean, it's like there's some connection that draws you to a particular animal, and you kind of feel it. And that is something that we highlight in our stories. If you haven't watched Brian and Kim and Lana, that's another great example of just how Brian just met Lana and connected with her in this way that was quite extraordinary, and it brought him back to life after a really tragic loss in his family, and helped him reconnect with his wife, who they just had kind of grown apart from the trauma. And um, you know, it's stunning what can happen when you have that connection.
Yeah.
And when we lose touch with it, and when we can reconnect with an animal, it also gets us back in touch with what it means to be connected, and it helps us connect back into the world and to other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Because so many of these people are coming from their own pain, incredible pains. All these stories have this common theme, I find, with what you present, and I'm sure that's not always the case. There'll just be families that want a dog and they go to the rescue
Yeah.
shelter and get a dog, right? Like,
Exactly.
let's
Yeah.
not blow it all
They
out of
bring more joy
proportion,
into
but
your life, and it's
yeah.
fun. That's good
But
enough reason, right?
I love how it solves a double issue. You've got these dogs that have had these horrible experiences in some cases, or been abandoned, humans who are suffering their own pain and their own story, but they're able to come together and heal in a way that just wouldn't be possible without each other. It's
Yeah.
it's so
It's
extraordinary.
extraordinary. It is
It's
extraordinary.
extraordinary. Tell me a little bit about. I get quite fascinated with some of the scientific research around this sort of
Yeah.
stuff. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the scientific research that you've seen on the effect of dogs and humans and that sort of stuff. And we'll share some of these links and so forth in the podcast. We tend to put all these podcasts on our blog as well, and we'll put the recording. I'll pop some of the videos in there as well off your
Great.
YouTube channel as well, because they are so heartwarming. But so talk me through some of the science, because there is very valid differences that this makes, not for just the dog, but also for human beings and their families as well.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book. The films share the heart piece. They share the story, and that's awesome. And the book is also filled with stories too. But I wanted to bring in the science and the research. And what the science and the research is showing is that there is a real physiological change that is happening in humans as well as the animals through the interaction. So, you're able to measure things like oxytocin and prolactin and serotonin, all these feel-good chemicals that are happening in your body when you interact with an animal. And what's really cool, they've done a functional MRI with dogs as well, and dogs are having a similar reaction as well. So it's like there's a physiological change in the dog as well when they're interacting with you, and it feels good. And then there's behavioral changes. Research has shown that people will commit to walking a dog when they're not motivated, maybe to just go out and take a walk themselves. And so they're more likely to go out and get exercise and that kind of thing. And then there's some of the more really interesting things that I came across writing the book is the role that animals can play in addiction. Sarah and Domino is a film about a young woman who was recovering from a heroin addiction and how a dog helped her get over that. And what the researchers are learning, and the hypothesis is that addiction is at its root level is about disconnection, that you are disconnected from other living beings and you use the addiction as a substitute for connection. And therefore, the role that animals can play is that they are creating an alternative in terms of connection. And so in the Sarah and Domino story, she wants to stay clean because of her relationship with this animal. And she really credits that relationship with helping her feel connected and alive and wanting to stay healthy. And the research is showing that those things do, make a difference, whether it's in your body or in your emotional state or in your relationships. So it's really pretty incredible. One of the most interesting things that I love was some research that was done that basically shows that marriages where you have really high positive regard and you assume that your spouse is not intentionally trying to hurt you, that those are the happiest marriages. And interestingly enough, people have a tendency to do that with their pet. Like if their pet does something, quote, bad or wrong, that they're more forgiving. Like they recognize that it wasn't intentional, that they weren't trying to do it to spite them or to hurt them.
Yeah.
And that same way that if we can take that and bring that into our human relationships, it can actually be a tremendous shift. And I found that super fascinating.
Yeah, that's I love that. That's a beautiful approach. We've had that experience recently. We've got two young kids, 5 and 1.5, and thought we'd get a new puppy, and of course the puppy
God
bite.
bless you. That's a lot. That's a lot of mouths to feed.
I love dogs. My last dog was 18 years old, and yeah, it's. I was a bit like, what was I thinking, especially with young children? But the biting, it's not intentional. It's trying to. Once the kids understood that, even they were so much more forgiving, and it didn't hurt them as much when they didn't think Luna was trying to bite them. It's just this funny perception around
Yeah.
people feel hurt more when they think it's intentional as well, I'm
Right.
sure.
Right.
Yeah,
When in fact it's not. Yeah.
yeah, they don't mean it. Yeah, so no, it's a beautiful lesson. Um, I wanted to ask you about some initiatives, and I'm not sure, excuse me, whether you're pursuing these sorts of things or not, but things like schools, things like nursing homes where you've got elderly who are often very lonely, and particularly during COVID where they weren't here in Australia, there was lockdowns, and as there is all throughout parts of the world, but people couldn't visit their own parents in a
Yeah.
nursing home for some time. And right where I live, there was a story on the news the other night about a dog that's sort of been visiting this nursing home, and they all come alive and just love this dog. And now the dog
Yeah.
has actually now been permanently placed there to live there,
Oh,
because
good.
it's having such a
Right.
great time, and it's really just doing so much for the
Yeah.
elderly folk that live there. Is there stuff like that on the agenda for Mutual Rescue, or what are the future plans?
Yeah, so right now, as I mentioned, we're focusing on our pet pantry program, and that's our next toolkit that we're working on. And as part of that, we're actually exploring whether or not there's also something about how that ties into helping elderly people feed their pets and keep pets when they're in their home.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of therapy dog organizations across the country that are doing things like that. So we don't have that specifically on the agenda at the moment, but
yeah,
certainly super supportive of that concept.
yeah, yeah.
And I mean, I personally am like, hey, when I get old, one of my criteria for a nursing home is, are there animals? Like I want that to be part of my experience.
Yeah, animal friendly. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think more and more of them are becoming accepting of that, though, aren't they? And look, I get that there's challenges with it. I get that there's challenges with dogs in schools, and I know there's reading dogs and stuff where they'll take dogs into schools, and for children that are struggling with reading, they'll sit there and read to a dog rather than a human
Yeah.
because they feel less embarrassed and less
Right. Yeah.
self-conscious, and it's working a treat. It's a terrific program. Now, of course, there's issues with that. Dogs, have to have extra vet care. They've got to be much more up to date with certain health checks and fleas and worming and heartworm and all the rest of it and stuff like that as well. But these are all solvable, maintenance things, aren't they?
Yeah.
Whether it's a nursing home or whatever it is. And I think we've just got to be really creative with it, don't we? Just to put the
Yeah.
right
I
systems in place and support.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I believe that these things are solvable, and you just first have to believe that there's value there. And when you look at the impact that, again, animals are having on humans, you just go, you know, this is worth the time and effort, not just for the animal, but for the people too. And,
Yeah.
again, the reading programs. I mean, the other place that's really interesting is working in prisons.
Oh yeah. Yeah, of
Huge
course. Yeah.
reform going on in prisons, and
Wow.
um, they're one of the things that I say about mutual rescue is you think that when you're giving to animals, whether it's time or money, oh, I'm taking away from humans. And in fact, you know, working with animals and helping animal causes, they're actually part of the solution.
Yeah. 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 And that's, you have the most perfect name in mutual, because
Yeah,
it is a
yeah,
mutually beneficial
yeah. I know
win-win.
this is
Yeah.
a dog
Hey.
program. I know it's a
No, no,
dog
that's all right.
program, but this is Herbie. Say hi,
Herbie.
Herbster.
Hey, Herbie. I was going to ask if you're a dog or a cat person.
I am both.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my beautiful shepherd Tess um, passed away, and so
Oh,
I do have a canine spot open in my house. So I'll be
yeah.
getting that filled soon. But Tess, there's actually a lovely picture of me and Tess on the back flap of my book that I just love,
Oh,
and
beautiful.
yeah, I carry her
Yeah.
in my heart. And my other shepherd before Tess was Kayla, and she was extraordinary too. So,
Yeah.
but at the moment,
Fantastic.
I'm a two cat household with an open spot for one or two dogs.
Need a dog to chase them around. That's what you need.
Well, no, actually, it works the other way. The cats keep the
Bossy
dogs in
cats.
line. Yeah, yeah.
I love it. Hey, I just wanted to look quickly. I know I had a bunch of questions here that I wanted to ask you about. Oh, look, how can organisations get involved? Businesses out there, how can they help mutual rescue? What is it that would give the most benefit to mutual rescue as for organisations and companies and that to get involved, or even other charities are looking to collaborate?
Yeah, so if you go to mutualrescue.org, you can get in contact with us. It's hello@mutualrescue.org. You can send us an email. If you're interested in corporate sponsorships, we can talk about ways to have you sponsor something and then again have that money get to the local level. And for organizations that want to get involved, if you want to download the Doggy Day Out toolkit, that's readily available. Our films are available. People aren't doing a lot of offline fundraising right now, but we make our films available for people that want to do fundraising efforts. As I mentioned, we're going to be getting this pet pantry program up and running. If people are interested in that, they can shoot us an email, and when we're starting to bring on more organizations, we can reach out with that as well. So, and just look at the films, read the book. The more people
Share
know
the
about
films.
mutual,
Share the films.
Yeah.
I can tell you if you ever wanted to bring a heartwarming story just to shift your team culture, if it's been a tough year for a lot of businesses out there, and if you just want to kind of shift your perspective and change it, go watch one of these films. They are so heartwarming and so beautifully done. That would be my advice to corporates out there. Just on a local level, though, you mentioned Dutch Brothers Coffee. Now, not everything has to be $100,000. Where can corporates get started from? Because they can make quite an impact even at a small level, and many hands make light work. So what sort of level can they get involved at a local level?
Well, at a local level, just reaching out to the shelters in your area and, donating directly to those shelters. That's always an option. And there's a lot of shelters that might have corporate volunteer programs. It's a little challenging right now with COVID, but there's volunteer programs. And so, there's a lot of need in local communities everywhere. So, the distinction between what we're doing at Mutual Rescue is that it's crafting a national message and national awareness because for businesses that are looking for something broader, it's hard for them. It's like with Humane Society of Silicon Valley, a national company like Subaru, that doesn't help them because they need to have broader appeal. So, one of my big dreams is we'll get Subaru as a sponsor, and then we'll be able to direct those, percent of sales will go out to local shelters across the country while there is a national message going on about what's happening. So that's my dream.
Yeah, love it.
Getting more money to the front line where the work's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, your programs are incredible. I think the stories you capture are just amazing. I'll have to go have a look at that other one, but Carol, I wanted to thank you so much for your time. I think you've built an incredible organisation. I'll have to get a copy of your book, and I'm going to buy some copies and give out to some people here in Australia as well. I think it's the one that kind of thing that might be a really good idea for it to be must reading in schools, just to change the perception for kids and a lot of empathy that can sort of come from that. I think it's so grossly needed in the world at the moment, and I love the work you're doing, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time out to chat with us today.
Well, thanks, Scott. It really has been fun, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. We'll catch up with you again soon.
All right, sounds great.
Thanks, Carol.